everybody, and welcome to Round the Horn. Our special guest this week is drummer Joe Bellia from the New Jersey band called the Weeklings. They had the coolest song in the world last year on Little Steven's Underground Garage. Hello, Joe. How are you?
Hey, Lee. How are you? Nice to have me here today. Thank you very much.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Our pleasure. Well, let's sort of start with, your drumming is something that is probably so much in demand. It has been for years and years and years. So let's start off with Little Joe when he starts playing drums.
Little Joe started like a lot of people did back in the early 60s. I saw Ringo on Ed Sullivan, and the next day I woke up and said, that's what I want to do. And my mom and dad bought me a practice pad, 10 years old. I remember waking up the next day and all the little girls in school were like crazy over the Beatles. And I was like, I loved them too, but I was like, so like a little jealous. And I was like, yeah, they were okay, but I was blown away, Right. And so I said, this is what I want to do. and I started taking lessons at 10. Very, very lucky break was that when I was 15, 16, I met someone who said, you play really well for your age. You should be studying with someone a little more famous, someone who could really take you to another level. And he introduced me to Joe Morello. Joe Morello was the drummer from Dave Brubeck's band.
Sure. Yeah.
Take Five, the famous, one of the first drum solos in a top 40 record.
Right, absolutely.
Take Five, and I was 16 and I went to audition for him, thinking I was kind of a hot shot, and I walked out of there. Like he was doing everything I was doing with two hands, with one hand, and it was like a second father figure to me all the years. And I studied. He really helped me develop my technique, and he was more about teaching you how to play than saying you should play jazz or you should play classical or whatever. He was into both, really. And as a result, I never had any problems with my wrists, like a lot of guys do playing rock and stuff. And all my life, I always played correctly, and I avoided a lot of situations like that. I studied with him from when I was 16 on and off till a year before he passed, which was only about 4 years ago, maybe. And in the end, I was going to him just to support him. I would go and I would just give him his $120 for the hour and say, and he'd tell his wife, Joe doesn't have to come back anymore. He's okay. But I would come back anyway. And let's work out, and because he really was a big influence, and he really, very early on, he taught me how to play correctly,
That's great. That's great.
Very big,
So what is
I handed a bucket of ice after a gig because it was numb or anything. And
right, sure.
That's big,
So what is Joe doing these days?
Wow. Not much of anything, but hopefully it's picking up again soon. But of course, I have a band called the Weeklings. Weeklings is a Beatles-inspired act. We have Beatles-inspired originals, and we do some Beatles covers that we rearrange ourselves a little bit. And we recorded our last album and a half, I guess, because we went to Abbey Road in London and recorded right with the Beatles in the same room that the Beatles recorded in. I was set up in the exact spot that Ringo recorded in, and
that's amazing. That's amazing.
And we played right in the same room with that same vibe, a lot of the same equipment, same microphones, and we got a chance to record where our heroes played, and it definitely has the room has something about it. You hit the bass drum and you hear that sound. Glenn Burtnick from the band, when we got to the room, first thing he did was they had some of the original pianos in there.
Okay, sure.
Down, he played that end chord from Day in the Life, the big E chord, boom, and you could hear it, and that's it. That sounded like it. Lady Madonna, that sounds like it. It sounded like the real thing. It was really cool. So I'm doing that, and then whoever else calls at this point, I'm Bobby Bandiera, Kenny Dubman. I'm playing this Saturday at Bar A. He does a set of originals. Kenny Dubman used to be with Prophet, great guitar player and singer, and he's got
Yes,
some great
absolutely.
originals.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bob Berger and his Elvis Costello show, and whoever calls. I built myself during this hiatus and in this time when I was looking for something to do here. I built myself a nice little drum studio over there, which is so a nice drum set with lots of microphones and samples and I can get some pretty awesome drum sounds right in this room.
Great.
So people
Great.
have been sending me tracks that they need drums for. So I do a drum track.
Right.
And I send it out. What else am I doing? I also developed a seminar on the style of Ringo's drumming. So I did it at Monmouth College a few times. I did it at some of the Beatles fests. It's an hour-and-a-half seminar that I can talk about Ringo's early style of drumming and Ringo's drum fills, and analyzes pretty intensely his style of drumming. I have a video on YouTube currently that has 70,000 hits on it, 70,000 views.
Wow, amazing.
Just it was sitting there for 8 months. It's on YouTube, and all of a sudden, the last month, it took off, and I was getting like 2,000, 3,000 hits a day.
Wow.
And it's pretty cool. So I'm going to put another one out of those. And
well, people don't realize that Ringo had a unique style because, from what I remember hearing, that he's left-handed, but he plays a right-handed kick.
It's correct. It's correct. But you know, Ringo. What people miss about him is how great his feels had a good swing to them. They would really swing. Those guys listened to Little Richard and all those great drummers. Charles Connor used to play with Little Richard, and he had this great half shuffle swing. So not a straight 2 and 3 and 4 and not a shuffle, but somewhere in between.
Sure. Yeah.
And it created this great little swing. And Ringo did that exact same thing with the Beatles and had that great old school swing, copying the great jazz drummers who became rock drummers to make money.
Sure.
And so that band feels, the Beatles records feel so great for a reason. And he's the reason, you know, besides McCartney and Lennon and George Harrison too, but he's the reason that
somebody's got to keep the beat going.
You know, gave them what they wanted, you know, and made it, he's underrated, but I think he's starting to get his due a little more these days. I think people are starting to talk about
amazing that he's still playing at 80 years old.
Yeah. I should only be so lucky. That's for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll retire when the phone stops ringing, of course.
Well, let's talk about baseball. Did you play as a kid?
You know, I played as a kid. I was never very good because my father was a city boy,
okay,
who didn't wear jeans till he moved to Florida when he was in his late 50s, early 60s. So he never really threw baseball back and forth with me, but I loved baseball when I was a kid. I was a big Yankee fan. They were the rock stars of the 60s.
Right, sure.
I mean, it's not like, I mean, I don't know. I don't follow it as much today, but I don't feel the same or inspired or, oh my God, like I remember it was the biggest thing in the world to get a box set of cards, to get the baseball cards, to get a box set and open up one pack at a time.
Right.
And besides the gum, you know, open one pack at a time. And then Bobby Richardson and Elston Howard and Tony Kubek and all these names that I never forget because I used to stare at their cards.
Sure, yes.
I just loved it. And you know, Mickey Mantle, of course, and you know, Whitey Ford and all these larger than life names. And I used to love baseball. But whenever I would try to play, I would get called last. You know, when they choose side, I just never did it enough to really play.
Right, sure.
So one of the reasons why I think maybe I played drums so well is because I used to go and I would get disappointed because I either wouldn't get called or called last, or I would join a little league, and they would never play me. And they didn't even give me a uniform. I mean, they ran out of uniforms, and I was the guy that didn't get the uniform. So I used to go home pretty upset, and I would bang on the drums and be upset.
Okay.
My friends would be playing ball, and I'd be banging on the drums. So a lot of those guys aren't playing ball anymore, but I'm still playing drums. So, I love that era of baseball. I mean, it was something magical about it, and even before that, I mean, you know, the heroes, Babe Ruth and Joe DiMaggio, they were just as popular as any presidents, or they were huge, you know. Babe Ruth, his career like followed the nation. I mean, he was the product of the 20s when everything was larger than life and powerful and wild and almost excessive, you know.
Right, sure.
And his career was soared until the end of the 20s, like the Depression. The Depression happened, and his career almost died at the same time, or started to go downhill at the same time. Yeah, right. Very interesting, you know.
Well, little did most people don't know some of the little things about Babe Ruth, and in fact, you may not know this, but he used to hang out in Asbury Park a lot.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. Yep. And Yankees had actually used Asbury Park as a spring training site.
Really?
In the early 40s. And one year it was Asbury, the next year it was Lakewood, and then the next year was Atlantic City. So, you know, when we got weather like this, it's in the 40s, you can still play. So that's what happened back then, because they could, you know, Florida didn't really, most people didn't even exist then. So,
yeah. Wow, I didn't know that. That's interesting. Where did he live?
He didn't live. He lived in the city, but you know, he came down and he had friends in Asbury Park, and so when they did train in Asbury, he was around. So
it's really doing just amazing stories. I mean, all these guys from back then. You could write. I mean, I'm sure there are books about each one of these guys, and you could do movies. I mean, they're interesting stories. Their whole life it doesn't seem that's not happening today. You know.
Yeah, well, it will with some players, that's for sure. You know, once they retire and everything. But in fact, one of our previous guests was he's an author and a journalist, and he helped Tom Seaver write a book called The Art of Pitching. So now that Seaver's gone, and you know that book's going to take off, because there were so many little things in there about, you know, just being a pro ball player, that I know when I read the book, you know, I was just enamored by it and followed everything that he did to a T, you know, like not shaving on the day you're going to pitch, you know, because it would interfere.
Wow. Yeah.
Nowadays, you got guys that, in fact, now we just mentioned this to a previous guest. There's more guys with beards now than there ever was.
Right.
You don't see that.
Is it still against the club policy with the Yankees?
With the Yankees, yes. And that was something that George Steinbrenner instituted, because he had a background. He was, I guess, in the Marines, if I'm not mistaken. So he was prim and proper, and you had to shave every day. They did allow mustaches.
Yeah. But
there was the famous feud between him and Don Mattingly about Don Mattingly's hair. But yeah, with George, it was you shave or you're out.
Wow.
You had to toe the line with Mr. Steinbrenner.
Yeah, yeah.
In fact, back then, I think also the Cincinnati Reds had the same policy with Marge Schott, who was the owner at the time. But that's kind of changed. And I'm sure someday in the future, you're going to see some Yankees with beards too.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But they always allowed mustaches as long as they were well trimmed.
Right.
And I remember, in fact, we mentioned this in one of our previous shows, Oscar Gamble, who played for the Yankees, had this huge afro and stuck it under a hat. So it's like, he almost looked like Bozo the Clown. It was all sticking out on either side.
It would explode when he took off the hat.
Yeah, but actually, I remember pictures of Reggie had a pretty good afro back then too.
Yeah.
You don't see much of that. You see a lot of braids and things like that these days, which to me, that's not a ball player.
Yeah. So, you know, I remember when big when I was a kid. Also, the big thing would be to get those cards and go into the playground at school and flip them.
Oh yeah, right.
And I couldn't remember, how did you win when you flipped? What did you?
You had to land on somebody else's card. In fact, there's a guy that I think you know, and you might have played with, Charlie Ingwe from the Soul Survivors.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Charlie was on recently, and he talked about flipping cards. Anytime that he grew up in Lower Manhattan.
Yeah.
And anytime it was raining, they go inside somebody's hallway to flip cards. You know, amazing stories. That's for sure.
Yeah, it was cool stuff. That was, I mean, it was the Beatles and baseball, really. I mean,
I remember, yeah, there were Beatle cards.
Beatle cards. It was they were all the rock stars of the '60s. Really,
absolutely,
cool.
Absolutely. Joe, it's time for us to go. Unfortunately, we had a great time talking about baseball and music, of course.
Well, I really appreciate you having me.
I got one more question for you. Who came up with the name Smokestack?
Bob Berger came up with the name Smokestack.
Okay.
It was because I refused their first name, which would have been Whitey Weekling. They wanted to be Whitey Weekling, and I said, I don't know, this doesn't sound very soulful. I mean, I think it sounds like. And he said, how about Smokestack? I said, oh, that's a good one.
Well, we've been talking to Smokestack Weekling, otherwise known as Joe Bellia. And thank you very much for stopping by and spending time with us and tell us some stories. We appreciate it. That's for sure.
Everyone stay safe, and it looks like things are starting to lighten up, and I think we're going to be back to normal sometime this year, I'm sure. But
let's hope. Yep. All right. Good luck with everything, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay, great.
Thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you next week. Good night.